Here is something nobody tells you. The most dangerous thing you can do, according to ancient Gnostic wisdom, is live in a home that is spiritually empty. Not dark, not evil, just empty. Because emptiness is an open door, and there are forces in this world, forces the Gnostics called Archons, that walk right through open doors without knocking. Mary Magdalene knew this. Not the Mary the church painted for centuries, the repentant sinner, the weeping woman, the footnote. The real Mary, the one who carried knowledge so precise, so powerful, that entire institutions spent hundreds of years trying to make sure you never found it. The one who understood that spiritual protection was not just prayer. It was not just intention. It was living, breathing, growing. She knew about a plant. One specific plant. A plant that chosen ones, people like you, people who are awake enough to even be watching something like this, were meant to grow inside their homes. Not as decoration. Not as an aesthetic choice. As a shield. As a consecrated, living, frequency-holding guardian that Archons genuinely cannot tolerate. And here is what gets me every single time I think about this. This knowledge was not lost by accident. It was not forgotten because people stopped caring. It was buried. Strategically. Deliberately. Because a plant you can grow yourself in a pot on a windowsill with your own hands, that is something no institution can control. No one can sell it to you. No one can withhold it from you. And that made it dangerous to the wrong kind of power. You're about to find out what that plan is. You're about to understand why it works. And by the end of this, you will never look at your home the same way again. Stay with me. Every word of this matters. Let me be direct with you about something most spiritual content refuses to say out loud. The erasure of Mary Magdalene was one of the most calculated moves in the history of religious power. This was not a misunderstanding that got corrected over time. This was a deliberate reduction of a woman who held some of the most sophisticated spiritual knowledge of her era, brought down to a single, manageable image. The weeping sinner, the reformed woman at the feet of Jesus. Grateful, quiet, non-threatening. That image served a purpose, and that purpose was not truth. Who was Mary Magdalene really? She was an initiate. In the ancient world, that word meant something specific. It meant someone who had been trained, not just in belief, but in knowledge. The kind of knowledge that bridges the visible and invisible worlds. The kind of knowledge that understands how matter, frequency, consciousness, and divine force actually interact. She was present at the crucifixion when most of the male disciples had fled. She was the first witness to the resurrection. In early Christian communities, before Rome consolidated power and decided who mattered and who didn't, she was called apostle to the apostles. That title was not sentiment. It was recognition of her rank. And here is what I personally believe after spending years with these traditions. Mary didn't just follow Jesus. She understood him, on a level that required her to have her own deep training in the nature of the soul, the nature of matter, and the nature of the forces that oppose divine light. You cannot understand what Jesus was doing in the world without understanding the cosmology he was working within. And Mary understood that cosmology completely. That cosmology included the Archons. It included the understanding that the soul moves through layers of opposition on its journey toward divine union. And it included something that most modern spirituality has completely abandoned, the understanding that the physical world, including living plants, including the earth beneath your feet, including the air inside your home, is not separate from your spiritual protection. It is part of it. Mary Magdalene did not teach in abstractions alone. She taught through action. Through what she touched, through what she carried, through what she used in her most sacred moments. And one of those things was a plant that the ancient world considered holy in ways we have almost entirely forgotten. Close your eyes for just a moment. Actually do it, then come back. Imagine your home late at night. Everyone is asleep or you are alone. And there is this weight. You cannot name it. It is not depression exactly, not anxiety exactly. It is more like a thickness in the air. Like something invisible is sitting in the corner of the room, feeding quietly on every unresolved fear you carry, every doubt about your worth, every moment of confusion about your path, every time you almost remembered who you are, and then forgot again. Have you felt that? I have, and I do not think it is random. That feeling has a name in Gnostic cosmology. The system that created it has a name. They are called Archons, a Greek word meaning rulers or authorities, not rulers of light. Rulers of the lower order. The Gnostic texts found at Nag Hammadi in Egypt in 1945 one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, a collection of ancient manuscripts that the early church had ordered destroyed, describe Archons in remarkable detail. They are not described as horned monsters. They are described as administrators of limitation, forces that maintain the structure of the material world by keeping consciousness confused, disconnected, and small. They feed on a very specific energy, the energy of a soul that has forgotten its divine origin. Fear works perfectly for them. Confusion works. Despair works. Spiritual exhaustion works. But here is what the Gnostic tradition, and Mary Magdalene's entire teaching lineage, understood that modern spirituality largely ignores. Archons are not omnipotent. They have a weakness, and that weakness is coherent natural frequency. Valentinus, a 2nd century Gnostic master teacher, who was arguably the most sophisticated theological mind of early esoteric Christianity, a man whose depth of understanding was so threatening that Rome spent enormous energy discrediting him, wrote about the Archons as forces that are fundamentally imitative. They can copy, they can mimic, they can create illusions, but they cannot originate. They cannot generate genuine life force. They cannot produce what the living natural world produces. This is the key that unlocks everything. A living plant is not something Archons can imitate. They can fill a sterile, concrete, dead air space with ease. But a home where something living grows, something rooted, breathing, emitting, consecrated, that is a different kind of environment entirely. The frequency is wrong for them. The coherence is too high. Mary knew this not as poetic metaphor. She knew it as working knowledge. The kind you use. The kind you grow in a pot and place near your door. Modern spirituality loves crystals. I love crystals too. It loves affirmations, sigils, sacred geometry, sound bowls. All of these are real. All of these carry genuine frequency and genuine function. But somewhere along the way, and I think this was not entirely accidental, we got quietly steered away from the one form of spiritual protection that is self-renewing. That breathes, that grows, that responds to your presence, that cannot be mass-produced in a factory in the same way, that carries the original divine blueprint in its very cellular structure. Plants. The ancient world did not separate botany from theology. These were not two different departments. They were the same science, studied by the same people, applied in the same sacred spaces. Priests were herbalists. Mystics were gardeners. The temple always had a garden. Always. Hildegard von Bingen, the 12th century German Christian mystic, composer, healer, and visionary whose depth of perception the Vatican eventually recognized with sainthood, had a word for what flows through all living plants. She called it viriditas, the greening power, the divine life force that moves through the living world like current through a wire. She wrote that when a human being loses connection to viriditas, to the living, growing, breathing natural world, the soul begins to wither in ways that no amount of prayer alone can fully repair. She was not speaking as a poet. She was speaking as someone who used plants medicinally and spiritually with extraordinary precision for decades. Now bring modern science into this for just a moment. Plants emit bioelectric fields. They release volatile organic compounds that directly affect human brain chemistry. They respond to human voice and touch. Research in plant bioacoustics has documented measurable responses in plants exposed to sound, to music, to human presence. The boundary between the plant kingdom and the human energy field is far more permeable than your biology textbook suggested. And esoterically, the Gnostic tradition teaches something breathtaking. Plants were part of the original creation, the divine blueprint before archonic interference. They carry what the Gnostics called the pleroma, the fullness of divine light, encoded in their living structure in a way that the corrupted material world around us largely does not. A living plant inside your home is not just aesthetically pleasing. It is a node of original frequency in an environment that has largely been stripped of it. Stone floors, metal structures, electromagnetic fields from devices, synthetic materials on every surface. We have built ourselves into the most Archon-friendly living environments in human history. Sterile, dead, disconnected from the living earth. And Mary Magdalene's teaching cuts right through all of it with one simple, radical, available act. Grow this plant. Put it in your home. Tend it. Let it breathe. I want you to hear the name of this plant and feel it rather than just register it. White sage. Salvia apiana. Say the Latin to yourself slowly. Salvia. It comes directly from the Latin root salver, which means to save, to heal. To make whole. The ancient Romans did not name plants casually. When they called this plant salvia, they were encoding its function into its name for anyone with ears to hear. This is a plant whose name literally means the one that saves. Now let me tell you why Mary Magdalene's tradition would have known this plant, revered this plant, and, I believe with genuine conviction, taught chosen ones to grow it. Sage in its various forms, and white sage in particular, was present across the ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern world as a sacred purification plant. In Hebrew tradition, aromatic herbs used in purification and consecration rites were not symbolic gestures. They were understood to change the energetic quality of a space. The smoke, the scent, the living plant, all of it functioned as what we would today call a frequency intervention. The word purification in ancient sacred context never meant simply cleaning. It meant removing what does not belong at this frequency level. It meant creating a space where lower-order forces, what the Gnostics called Archons, could not maintain their hold. White sage does exactly this, and it does it in ways that are now measurable. A 2007 study published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology found that burning white sage in an enclosed space reduced airborne bacteria by over 94%. And this bacterial clearing effect lasted for up to 30 days. Now, I am not saying Archons are bacteria, but what I am saying is this. The living and activated properties of white sage demonstrably clear the environment on a biological level that we can measure with instruments. What it does on levels we cannot yet measure with instruments is what the ancient initiates spent their entire lives studying. And here is what strikes me most deeply about white sage's place in Mary Magdalene's world. The purification traditions of the ancient Near East, the ones Mary would have been steeped in as an initiate, understood consecration as a two-part act. First, you clear what does not belong. Then you fill the space with something that does. White sage does both. The living plant continuously emits compounds that clear and rebalance the air. The activated, intentional plant, tended by a conscious, awake human being, holds a frequency that is, in the deepest sense of the word, inhospitable to archonic energy. It does not fight. It does not battle. It simply is at a frequency that archonic forces cannot match or enter. This is not aggression. This is sovereignty. And that distinction, between fighting darkness and simply being too full of light for darkness to enter, is at the absolute core of what Mary Magdalene taught. Let me go deeper here, because this is where it gets extraordinary. White sage contains active compounds called sesquiterpenes and thujone. These are not ordinary compounds. Sesquiterpenes, which also appear in frankincense, another plant Mary's world considered deeply sacred, have been studied for their ability to cross the blood-brain barrier. This is a barrier that most substances cannot penetrate. Sesquiterpenes cross it and directly affect the limbic system, the brain's emotional processing and memory center. Now hold that for a moment. In Gnostic understanding, the pneuma, the divine spark, the fragment of original light living inside each human being, is most accessible through what we might today call the deeper emotional and intuitive centers of the brain. The limbic system, the place where your most authentic feelings, your deepest memories, your truest sense of self actually lives. And Archons, according to Gnostic cosmology, work precisely at this level. They generate the static, the fear noise, the confusion signal, the forgetting, at exactly this depth. This is why spiritual attack often feels like emotional disorientation, rather than something you can clearly name and point at. White sage's compounds go to that exact location in the brain and stabilize it. Calm it. Bring it back into coherence. This is not coincidence. In the ancient world, plants with this level of precision were called sacred precisely because the line between their physical action and their spiritual action was invisible. They worked on both levels simultaneously. That was the point. In ancient Egyptian tradition, and Mary Magdalene's initiatic lineage had deep Egyptian roots, something mainstream scholarship is increasingly acknowledging. Aromatic sacred plants were placed not just in temples but in homes, specifically to protect the Ka, the subtle body, the energetic double, during sleep. Because in sleep, the Gnostics understood, the soul becomes more vulnerable to lower realm interference. The veil between conscious protection and archonic access thins. A living white sage plant in your home, especially near where you sleep, is doing something profound while you rest. It is holding a field. It is maintaining a frequency. It is doing the work even when you are not consciously doing anything. And this brings me to something I feel strongly about. We have been taught to think of spiritual protection as something we perform. We burn a candle for a set amount of time. We say an affirmation in the morning. We do a ritual and then go back to an energetically empty home for the next 23 hours. Mary Magdalene's approach was different. It was continuous. It was alive. It was rooted, literally, in something that never stopped working. A plant does not take a day off. A plant does not forget its purpose when you get distracted by life. It keeps growing. It keeps emitting. It keeps holding the field. That is the genius of this teaching. And that genius was buried for a reason. Now let me bring this into your actual life. Because knowledge that stays abstract is not really knowledge. It is just information. And Mary Magdalene was not interested in information. She was interested in transformation. First, the practical. White sage, Salvia apiana, is a hardy, relatively drought-tolerant plant. It grows best in well-draining soil with plenty of direct sunlight. If you live somewhere with limited outdoor space or a colder climate, it grows beautifully indoors near a south-facing window. It does not want to be overwatered. It does not want heavy, wet soil. It wants light and air, which, if you think about it esoterically, makes complete sense for a plant whose function is to hold a clear, luminous frequency. You can grow it from seed or from a cutting. Both work. If you genuinely cannot grow the living plant where you are right now, a high-quality white sage essential oil, not a synthetic fragrance, but a genuine, properly extracted essential oil, carries a significant portion of the plant's active frequency compounds. Use it, diffuse it, apply it with intention. But the living plant is the fullest expression of this teaching. Always aim for the living plant. Now the activation. Because this is where most people stop short. A white sage plant sitting in a pot, bought from a garden center, placed on a shelf without awareness. It still does something. All living plants do. But a consciously activated, intentionally placed, tended with awareness, white sage plant operates on a completely different level. This is what Mary Magdalene's teaching was actually pointing toward. The plant is the instrument. You're the one who tunes it. Dr. Masaru Emoto, the Japanese researcher whose pioneering water crystal studies demonstrated that water physically changes its crystalline structure in response to human words, intentions, and emotions, gave us a scientific language for something ancient initiates already knew. Living matter responds to human consciousness. It is not passive. The moment you bring conscious intention into your relationship with a living plant, you change what that plant is doing in your space. So here is how you activate your white sage. When you first bring it home, hold it in your hands. Not briefly, take a real moment. Speak to it. This is not strange. This is ancient. Tell it what you need it to do. Tell it what your home is. Tell it that this space belongs to you, to your sovereign soul, to the divine light you carry, and that nothing that feeds on fear or confusion is welcome here. Your voice carries frequency. Sound is one of the most powerful forces in creation. The Gnostic texts begin creation itself with a divine sound, a divine emanation. When you speak with genuine conviction over a living plant, you are co-creating with it. You are telling it its purpose. And living things, as the ancient world understood and as emerging science increasingly suggests, rise to meet the intention held for them. Place it consciously, near the entrance of your home. This is where energy enters and exits most actively. Near where you sleep, this is where you are most vulnerable and where continuous protection matters most. Or in the center of your home, where it can radiate in all directions. Tend it with awareness, not routine. When you water it, be present. When you prune it, acknowledge what it is doing for your space. This ongoing conscious relationship is what keeps the activation alive. It is not a one-time ceremony. It is a living practice. And when you do this, when you shift from treating this plant as an object to relating to it as a partner in your spiritual sovereignty, something shifts in your home that you will feel before you can explain it. I want to speak to you directly now, not as a content creator, as someone who genuinely believes what they are telling you. Being a chosen one is not a title. It is not an identity you wear because it makes you feel special. Chosen ones throughout history, the ones who actually carried and transmitted genuine sacred knowledge, were not chosen because they were the most talented, the most educated, or the most spiritually advanced. They were chosen because they were willing to remember when the world was working very hard to make them forget. Mary Magdalene was not exceptional because she was sinless or perfect. She was exceptional because in the moments when everyone around her was collapsing into fear, confusion, and forgetting, she remembered. She remembered who Jesus was. She remembered what the work was. She remembered what tools she carried. She was the first to the tomb on the morning of the resurrection, while others were still locked in grief and paralysis. She showed up with her knowledge intact. That is what a chosen one does. And here is what I want you to understand about the Archons' primary strategy. It is not possession. It is not dramatic spiritual attack in the way movies depict it. Their primary strategy is forgetfulness, making you forget your divine origin, making you forget your power, making you forget the living tools available to you, making your spiritual practice feel irrelevant, naive, or too simple to matter. Of course, a plant can't protect me. That's too simple. That's too available. That's too easy. That thought, that exact dismissal, is archonic interference working perfectly. Because the truth is, the most powerful things in the ancient world were always simple, available, and direct. A word spoken with full conviction. A breath drawn with complete awareness. A living plant tended with sacred intention. These are not weak tools. These are the original tools. The ones that existed before any institution could gatekeep them. Growing white sage in your home is an act of remembering. Every time you water it, you are making a statement that goes beyond the physical. You are saying, with action, which is the most powerful form of statement there is, I know what I am. I know what this space is. I know what grows here. And I know what cannot enter where this grows. That declaration, repeated in action every single day, builds something in your home and in your field that accumulates over time. This is what the ancient initiates called consecration through consistency. Not one dramatic ceremony. 1,000 quiet, intentional acts that build a frequency wall so solid, so coherent, so full of living light, that what feeds on confusion and fear finds no foothold. No darkness conquers. It simply finds no entry. I personally believe that the reason this specific teaching, plants as living spiritual protection, the home as a sacred field, the chosen one as a keeper of living knowledge, was so thoroughly suppressed is because it requires no intermediary. No priest. No institution. No special permission. Just you, a living plant, and the ancient wisdom to know what you are doing and why. That kind of power, fully in your own hands, was and remains the most threatening thing imaginable to systems built on spiritual dependency. Mary Magdalene wanted you to have it anyway. Everything we have covered today points to one thing. Mary Magdalene was not a passive figure in the story of sacred knowledge. She was an active keeper of it. She understood the soul. She understood the forces that oppose it. And she understood that protection was not something you petition for. It is something you cultivate, deliberately, consistently, with your own hands. That understanding is what brought us to white sage. Not as a trend, not as an aesthetic, as a living, breathing, continuously working field of divine frequency rooted in your home. A plant whose very name means to save, whose compounds go directly to the place in your brain where archons do their quietest and most damaging work, whose presence in your space creates something that forgetfulness, their greatest weapon, simply cannot survive. This is ancient knowledge, and it is yours now. The tradition Mary carried did not belong to temples or institutions. It belonged to people. People willing to grow something with intention. People willing to tend it with awareness. People willing to say, through action every single day, I know what I am. And I know what cannot enter where I live. That is the chosen one's real work. Not dramatic. Not complicated. Just consistent and awake. Go grow something holy. Place it near your door. Speak over it. Tend it like it matters, because it does. And know, with every new leaf it unfolds, that you are participating in an unbroken line of wisdom that runs from the ancient world straight through to your windowsill. Archons thrive in forgetfulness. You just remembered.